The facility was in ruins. Emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows on the walls as Daniel and Laura stumbled through the wreckage. The air smelled of burnt metal and smoke, and the silence was broken only by the distant hum of failing systems. They moved carefully, their bodies aching from exhaustion, but their minds sharp with purpose. As they reached the exit, they found Ryan sitting on the ground outside, his hands cuffed behind his back. Two guards stood nearby, their weapons lowered in confusion after the chaos inside. When Ryan saw them, his face lit up despite his battered appearance. "You made it," he said, relief breaking through his voice. "I wasn't sure you'd pull it off." "We couldn't have done it without you," Daniel replied, kneeling beside him. He pulled out the override tool and quickly unlocked the cuffs. Ryan rubbed his wrists, wincing slightly. "What now?" Ryan asked, looking between them. "They're going to come after us." Laura shook her head firmly. "Not if we expose the truth first. The world needs to know what they were building. And why." Daniel nodded in agreement. "We'll gather all the evidence we can and get it out there. Files, recordings, anything that proves what Ethan and his team were planning." Ryan hesitated but then smiled faintly. "You realize this means we're fugitives, right? No turning back." "None of us wanted this," Laura said softly. "But sometimes doing the right thing means paying a price." They spent the next hour combing through the remains of the facility, collecting data drives, documents, and fragments of the weapon's design. Every piece they salvaged felt like a step toward ensuring no one could rebuild it. By the time they finished, the sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As they drove away in an old truck left parked near the site, none of them spoke for a long time. The weight of what they had done hung heavy in the air. They had destroyed something powerful, something dangerous, but at great personal cost. Ryan glanced at Daniel in the rearview mirror. "So, where do we go from here?" he asked quietly. "To the press," Daniel answered, "and to anyone who will listen. This isn't just about stopping one weapon. It's about making sure humanity doesn't repeat its mistakes." Laura leaned her head against the window, watching the desert roll by. "Do you think people will believe us? Or will they try to build it again?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but we owe it to everyone to try." When they reached the nearest town, they split up temporarily. Ryan went to find a secure way to upload the files online, while Daniel and Laura visited a small local library to draft a detailed report. Hours later, their story began spreading across news outlets and social media platforms. Governments scrambled to deny involvement, but the evidence was undeniable. In the weeks that followed, public outrage grew. Protests erupted worldwide, demanding transparency and accountability. Scientists and ethicists joined the conversation, warning of the dangers of unchecked technological ambition. Slowly, the tide turned against those who sought power at any cost. For Daniel, Laura, and Ryan, life became a blur of interviews, hearings, and debates. They lived under assumed names, constantly moving to avoid retaliation. It wasn't easy, but none of them regretted their decision. One evening, as they sat together in a quiet cabin far from the chaos, Laura opened her journal and began writing. Her words captured not just their journey but the lessons they had learned along the way. The fragility of trust, the weight of responsibility, and the courage it took to stand against forces greater than themselves. "You think anyone will read this?" Ryan asked, leaning back in his chair. "Maybe," Laura replied with a small smile. "Or maybe it's just for us, a reminder of why we fought." Daniel looked out the window at the stars scattered across the night sky. For the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. The weapon was gone, its secrets buried once more. Humanity still faced challenges, but it also had a chance to choose a better path. And that, he realized, was worth everything they had sacrificed. Ethan cursed under his breath, turning to the console. "Fine. If you won't cooperate, I'll handle it myself." "What's happening?" Daniel asked, panic rising. "The weapon's destabilizing," Laura answered grimly. "If it activates now, it could destroy everything." Ethan began typing furiously, overriding safety protocols. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "Stop. You're going to kill us all." Ethan shoved him away, snarling, "Better dead than chaotic." Laura seized the moment, rushing to the console. With trembling hands, she entered commands to initiate a full shutdown. Ethan tried to stop her, but Daniel tackled him to the ground, buying her precious seconds. The room shuddered violently as energy surged through the weapon's core. Sparks flew from the machinery, and the air grew thick with static. Finally, with a deafening crack, the system collapsed, plunging the facility into darkness. When the dust settled, Ethan lay unconscious, and the weapon was silent. Laura slumped against the console, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she whispered. "We did it." Daniel pulled her close, his own body shaking with relief. But as they looked around at the wreckage, they knew the world would never forget what had happened here, or the choices they had made. The lower levels of the facility were colder and darker, lit only by dim emergency lights that flickered sporadically. Daniel moved cautiously, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet lining the hallway. Every sound, the hum of distant machinery, the faint buzz of fluorescent bulbs, felt unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. He clutched a small device in his pocket, a portable override tool Ryan had given him days earlier. It was their last hope. As he approached the high-security area marked on the map, 2 guards stood at the entrance, their faces stern and alert. Daniel hesitated, his mind racing for a way past them. Pretending to be lost or confused wouldn't work here. This part of the facility wasn't meant for casual visitors. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward, holding up his ID badge. "I'm here to check on Dr. Bennett," he said, keeping his voice steady. "Dr. Hayes sent me." The guards exchanged skeptical glances. One of them gestured toward a security panel beside the door. "Log in and verify authorization." Daniel nodded, trying to hide his nerves as he inserted the override tool into the panel. A few seconds passed, then the screen flashed green. "Access guaranteed." The guards stepped aside without another word, but Daniel could feel their eyes on him as the heavy metal door slid open. Inside, the corridor was narrow and lined with reinforced doors, each one marked with a number. Daniel checked the map again, counting down until he reached cell 12. His heart pounded as he stopped in front of it, pressing his ear against the cold steel. Faint breathing came from within. "Laura," he whispered, tapping lightly on the door. There was a rustle of movement. Then her voice, weak but unmistakable. "Daniel, is that you?" Relief washed over him. "It's me. Hold on. I'll get you out." He used the override tool again, unlocking the door. When it swung open, Laura blinked in the sudden light, shielding her eyes. Her face was pale, and dark circles ringed her tired eyes, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. "You shouldn't have come," she said softly, standing slowly. "They'll arrest you too." "We don't have time for that," Daniel replied, handing her the tool. "Can you use this to disable the cameras? We need to move fast." Laura nodded, gripping the device tightly. "What about Ryan? Did you find him?" "He got caught," Daniel admitted, his voice heavy. "But he bought us some time. We can't waste it." Together, they crept back toward the main elevator, avoiding patrols and sticking to shadows. As they reached the control room housing the weapons core systems, Daniel froze. Ethan stood inside, speaking urgently into a phone. "They're onto us," Ethan said, his tone clipped. "Activate Phase 2 immediately. We can't afford any more delays." Phase 2. Daniel's stomach churned. Whatever it meant, it couldn't be good. Ethan hung up and turned, spotting them through the glass wall. For a moment, he just stared, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, a cold, calculating curve of his lips. "I thought you'd show up eventually," he said, stepping closer. Tell me, did you really think you could stop this? We can try, Daniel shot back, stepping protectively in front of Laura. You don't get to decide the future for everyone else. Ethan shrugged. Someone has to. Humanity doesn't deserve freedom. It's proven that over and over. This weapon ensures stability, even if people don't understand it yet. No, Laura interjected, her voice firm despite her exhaustion. You're wrong. Control isn't stability. It's oppression. And we won't let you do it. Ethan sighed, shaking his head. Such idealism. Pity you won't live to see how wrong you are. Before either of them could react, alarms blared once more. Red lights bathed the room as automated voices announced an imminent system shutdown. Ryan's sabotage had finally reached its breaking point. The sabotage didn't go unnoticed for long. By mid-morning, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red warning lights flashed in the hallways, and teams of engineers scrambled to diagnose the problem. Ethan's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and urgent. All personnel to their stations. This is not a drill. Ryan Parker stood in the middle of the chaos, pretending to analyze data on his tablet. His hands trembled slightly, but he kept his expression calm. He had done everything he could to delay the weapon's activation, but he knew it wouldn't hold forever. Sooner or later, someone would trace the issue back to him. Daniel Carter, meanwhile, was searching for Laura. He hadn't seen her since she was taken the night before, and no one seemed willing, or able, to tell him where she was being held. The facility was massive, its corridors labyrinthine, and security was tighter than ever. Every step felt like walking into a trap. As he rounded a corner, he nearly collided with Mia Rodriguez. She looked pale and distracted, clutching a folder tightly against her chest. When she saw Daniel, her eyes widened. "Daniel," she whispered, pulling him into an empty alcove. "What's going on?" "They're saying there's been a breach." "I don't know much," Daniel lied, trying to gauge whether he could trust her. "But I think someone tampered with the system." Mia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. "It's worse than that," she said finally. "They found evidence of deliberate interference. Someone inside the team is responsible." Daniel's stomach tightened. "Do they know who?" "Not yet," Maya replied. "But they're checking everyone's logs. If you've done anything." "I haven't." Daniel cut in quickly, though guilt flickered across his face. "Listen, have you seen Laura? Do you know where they're holding her?" Mia shook her head. "I'm sorry. I've been locked in the lab all morning." "But Daniel," she paused, lowering her voice. "Be careful. Whoever did this, they're going to come down hard on them." Before Daniel could respond, shouts echoed down the hallway. Guards were rushing toward the engineering wing, their boots pounding against the floor. Daniel's heart sank. They must have found Ryan. In the engineering bay, Ryan stood surrounded by guards, his hands raised in surrender. On one of the monitors behind him, lines of corrupted code scrolled endlessly, a clear sign of tampering. Ethan Hayes entered the room moments later, his expression cold and calculating. "You shouldn't have done this," Ethan said, stopping a few feet away from Ryan. "You had potential." Ryan met his gaze without flinching. "Potential for what?" "To help you enslave the world." "No thanks." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Take him to containment, and find out who helped him." As the guards dragged Ryan away, he shouted loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. "You can't stop us. Whatever you're building, it's wrong." Ethan watched him go, then turned to the engineers frantically working to repair the damage. "Fix it," he ordered. "We don't have time for delays." Back in the hallway, Daniel heard Ryan's voice echoing faintly. It was both a relief and a blow. He had hoped Ryan might escape undetected. Now, the clock was ticking faster than ever. Mia grabbed his arm, snapping him out of his thoughts. "You need to leave. Now, before they start questioning everyone." "But Laura," Daniel started. "I'll look for her," Mia interrupted. "You've already done too much. If they catch you. She didn't need to finish. Daniel nodded, gratitude mixing with fear. Thank you. He slipped away, blending into the crowd of workers rushing to their posts. As he moved through the facility, he replayed Ryan's words in his mind. Asterisk, you can't stop us. Asterisk, Ryan had sacrificed himself to buy them time. And Daniel couldn't let that be in vain. When he reached a secure access point, he used his credentials to log into the system. Scrolling through restricted files, he found what he was looking for, a map of the detention cells. One location blinked red, a high-security area deep underground. That had to be where they were holding Laura. Breaking into the cell block wouldn't be easy, but Daniel didn't care anymore. He owed it to Ryan, to Laura, and to everyone else caught in this nightmare. If the weapon was activated, none of them would have a future anyway. With renewed determination, Daniel set off toward the lower levels of the facility. Somewhere ahead, Laura was waiting, and together, they would make sure the weapon never saw the light of day. Daniel didn't waste any time. He slipped out of the lab and made his way to the engineering wing, where Ryan Parker was working late. The younger man sat hunched over a computer screen, frowning at lines of code scrolling past. His workspace was cluttered with tools and half-empty coffee cups, evidence of long hours spent trying to keep the weapons systems stable. Ryan, Daniel said quietly, closing the door behind him. Ryan glanced up, surprised to see him. Dr. Carter, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Daniel replied, pulling up a chair. Something's wrong, very wrong. Ryan raised an eyebrow, but gestured for him to continue. I'm listening. Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Laura figured it out. The weapon isn't meant to protect us. It's designed to control people, to manipulate their minds, and force them into submission. Ryan's face darkened. That's insane. Why would anyone build something like that? They think they're doing the right thing, Daniel explained. Ethan believes humanity can't handle freedom, that we need someone in charge to keep things under control. But Laura disagreed, and now they've taken her away. Took her? Ryan repeated, his voice rising. What do you mean, took her? They detained her, Daniel said grimly. She tried to warn me before they dragged her off. She told me to destroy the weapon. Ryan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his messy hair. This just keeps getting worse. First, the anomalies, now this. Are we sure we're the good guys here? I don't know anymore, Daniel admitted. But I do know one thing. We can't let them finish it. If this weapon gets activated, there's no telling what kind of damage it could cause. Ryan nodded slowly, his mind racing. Okay, say we agree on that. How do we stop it without getting ourselves locked up, or worse? We sabotage it, Daniel said firmly. You're the only one who knows the system well enough to disable key components without triggering alarms. At least, not right away. Ryan hesitated, clearly torn. Sabotage isn't exactly my job description. If they catch me. They won't, Daniel interrupted. Not if we act fast. Once the weapon is disabled, we'll find a way to expose the truth. Get the information out there so the world knows what's really going on. For a moment, Ryan stared at him, weighing the risks. Finally, he sighed. All right. I'm in. But if this goes sideways, you're buying my bail. A flicker of relief crossed Daniel's face. Deal. They got to work immediately, reviewing schematics and identifying critical points in the weapon's design. Ryan explained how certain subsystems could be disrupted without causing immediate suspicion, enough to delay activation while making repairs seem routine. As they planned, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Laura being led away. Her warning echoed in his mind. Asterisk destroyed. Asterisk, he knew she was counting on him to do the right thing, even if it meant risking everything. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking outside the facility's windows. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and gave Daniel a determined look. It's ready. Once I trigger the sequence, it'll take them hours to figure out what happened. Hopefully, that'll buy us some time. Good work, Daniel said, classifying a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Now let's hope it's enough. Ryan nodded and turned back to his workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard. Moments later, a soft beep signaled success. The system logs showed nothing unusual, just another minor glitch in an already unstable project. As they left the room, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. They had struck a blow against the machine, but the fight was far from over. Somewhere in the facility, Ethan was still watching, waiting, and Laura was counting on them to finish what she had started. Daniel didn't waste any time. He slipped out of the lab and made his way to the engineering wing, where Ryan Parker was working late. The younger man sat hunched over a computer screen, frowning at lines of code scrolling past. His workspace was cluttered with tools and half-empty coffee cups, evidence of long hours spent trying to keep the weapons systems stable. Ryan, Daniel said quietly, closing the door behind him. Ryan glanced up, surprised to see him. Dr. Carter, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Daniel replied, pulling up a chair. Something's wrong. Very wrong. Ryan raised an eyebrow, but gestured for him to continue. I'm listening. Daniel took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. Laura figured it out. The weapon isn't meant to protect us. It's designed to control people, to manipulate their minds and force them into submission. Ryan's face darkened. That's insane. Why would anyone build something like that? They think they're doing the right thing, Daniel explained. Ethan believes humanity can't handle freedom, that we need someone in charge to keep things under control. But Laura disagreed, and now they've taken her away. Took her? Ryan repeated, his voice rising. What do you mean, took her? They detained her, Daniel said grimly. She tried to warn me before they dragged her off. She told me to destroy the weapon. Ryan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his messy hair. This just keeps getting worse. First the anomalies, now this. Are we sure we're the good guys here? I don't know anymore, Daniel admitted. But I do know one thing. We can't let them finish it. If this weapon gets activated, there's no telling what kind of damage it could cause. Ryan nodded slowly, his mind racing. Okay, say we agree on that. How do we stop it without getting ourselves locked up, or worse? We sabotage it, Daniel said firmly. You're the only one who knows the system well enough to disable key components without triggering alarms. At least, not right away. Ryan hesitated, clearly torn. Sabotage isn't exactly my job description. If they catch me. They won't, Daniel interrupted. Not if we act fast. Once the weapon is disabled, we'll find a way to expose the truth. Get the information out there so the world knows what's really going on. For a moment, Ryan stared at him, weighing the risks. Finally, he sighed. All right. I'm in. But if this goes sideways, you're buying my bail. A flicker of relief crossed Daniel's face. Deal. They got to work immediately, reviewing schematics and identifying critical points in the weapon's design. Ryan explained how certain subsystems could be disrupted without causing immediate suspicion, enough to delay activation while making repairs seem routine. As they planned, Daniel couldn't shake the image of Laura being led away. Her warning echoed in his mind. Asterisk destroy. Asterisk, he knew she was counting on him to do the right thing, even if it meant risking everything. By the time they finished, dawn was breaking outside the facility's windows. Ryan wiped sweat from his brow and gave Daniel a determined look. It's ready. Once I trigger the sequence, it'll take them hours to figure out what happened. Hopefully, that'll buy us some time. Good work, Daniel said, classifying a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Now let's hope it's enough. Ryan nodded and turned back to his workstation, fingers flying across the keyboard. Moments later, a soft beep signaled success. The system log showed nothing unusual, just another minor glitch in an already unstable project. As they left the room, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. They had struck a blow against the machine, But the fight was far from over. Somewhere in the facility, Ethan was still watching, waiting, and Laura was counting on them to finish what she had started. Late one night, Laura sat alone in the lab, staring at the fragments spread across the table. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of machinery in the background. She had been going over the translations again and again, searching for something, anything, that might explain why the weapon felt so wrong. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but she couldn't stop. Something about the symbols didn't add up. As she traced her finger over a jagged line on one of the tablets, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Hidden within the swirling patterns was a subtle shift, a break in symmetry that hinted at dual meanings. It wasn't just a blueprint for the weapon. It was also a warning, a very specific warning. Her heart raced as realization dawned. The ancients hadn't designed the weapon to protect humanity. They'd built it to control them. Whoever wielded the device would gain unimaginable power, not just over nature, but over people's minds and wills. It wasn't a tool for survival. It was a tool for domination. Before she could process what this meant, the door creaked open. Ethan stepped inside, his sharp silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. He carried a folder under his arm and looked surprised to see her still working. "Late hours again?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. Laura quickly gathered the fragments, her hands trembling slightly. "Just tying up loose ends," she said, forcing a smile. "You?" Ethan walked closer, placing the folder on the table. "Reviewing some updates. Thought I'd check if you needed anything." She hesitated, debating whether to confront him. But the pieces were starting to fit together. The rushed deadlines, the dismissive attitude toward risks, the constant surveillance. This wasn't about protecting humanity. It never had been. "You've known all along, haven't you?" she said finally, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "This isn't about defense. You want to use the weapon to control people." Ethan froze, his mask slipping for just a moment. Then he smiled, a cold, calculated curve of his lips. "Control is a strong word. Let's call it guidance. Humanity has proven time and again that it can't handle freedom responsibly. Someone needs to steer the ship." Laura stood, pushing her chair back with a scrape. "And who decides that?" "You? Your bosses. What gives you the right?" "It's not about rights," Ethan replied calmly. "It's about necessity. Without order, chaos takes over. This weapon ensures stability. At any cost." She shook her head, disgust rising in her chest. "You're playing God, and you don't even realize how dangerous that is." Ethan's expression hardened. "Enough. You've done your part. Now step aside and let the professionals handle the rest." Before Laura could respond, two guards appeared behind Ethan, their faces blank. One of them grabbed her arm firmly but not roughly. She struggled briefly, but resistance was futile. "What are you doing?" Daniel's voice rang out from the doorway. He stood there, wide-eyed, having witnessed the scene unfold. "Taking precautions," Ethan said coolly. "Dr. Bennett has become unstable. For her safety and ours, she needs to be detained." "No." Daniel stepped forward, but another guard blocked his path. "You can't do this." "I already have," Ethan said, turning to leave. "Don't make things harder than they need to be, Daniel. Stick to the plan, and you'll walk away unscathed." As they dragged Laura out of the lab, she locked eyes with Daniel, her gaze filled with urgency. "Don't trust him," she mouthed silently. "Destroy it." The doors slammed shut, leaving Daniel alone in the lab. His mind reeled, torn between anger and fear. Laura's words echoed in his head. Was she right? Had they been building something far worse than they imagined? He glanced at the fragments on the table, their markings glowing faintly under the harsh lights. For the first time, they didn't look like clues to a great discovery. They looked like chains waiting to bind humanity. Daniel clenched his fists, resolve hardening within him. If Ethan wouldn't listen, someone else would have to act. and he knew exactly who might be willing to help. Strange things began happening around the facility as the weapons construction progressed. At first, they were small and easy to dismiss, a flickering light here, a sudden power surge there. But soon, the incidents grew harder to ignore. Equipment malfunctioned without explanation. Workers reported hearing faint whispers in empty hallways. Even the weather outside seemed unusual, with storms brewing out of nowhere and winds howling through the mountains. Daniel noticed it one evening while reviewing translations in the lab. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't quite explain. He glanced at Laura, who was typing furiously on her laptop. Her brow was furrowed, and she kept pausing to rub her temples. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked, setting his notes aside. Laura shook her head. "I don't know. I've had this headache all day. And it's not just me. Maya said she's been feeling off too. Like something's wrong." Before Daniel could respond, the lights dimmed briefly, then flared back to life. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor. Both of them froze, exchanging uneasy looks. "What was that?" Laura whispered. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, "but it's been happening a lot lately." The door swung open, and Mia rushed in, her face pale. "You felt it too, didn't you? The vibrations. It's getting worse." "Worse how?" Daniel asked, standing up. Mia hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if someone might be listening. "I think it's the weapon, or rather, the process of building it. Every time we add a new component, the disturbances increase. It's like the weapon is reacting to its own creation." "That's impossible," Laura said, though her voice wavered. "It's not even finished yet." "Exactly," Maya replied, "which means whatever's causing this isn't tied to the weapon itself. It's tied to the forces we're trying to harness. Gravity, time, energy. They're all interconnected. Messing with one affects the others." Daniel sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "So what are you saying? That we're destabilizing reality just by working on it?" Mia nodded grimly. "That's my theory. The ancients must have known this would happen. Maybe that's why they buried the pieces so carefully, to prevent anyone from messing with those forces." Laura stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Then we need to stop. Right now. Before it gets worse." "We can't stop," Maya said firmly. "Not unless we want someone else to finish it. And believe me, they won't care about the risks." As if on cue, Ethan entered the lab, his expression unreadable. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, glancing between them. "Just discussing the project," Daniel said quickly, avoiding eye contact. Ethan studied him for a moment before nodding. "Good, because we're ahead of schedule. Another week, maybe two, and we'll have a working prototype." "A prototype?" Laura blurted out, her voice sharp. "After everything that's been happening, you still want to go through with this?" Ethan's tone hardened. "We don't have a choice. The anomalies are concerning, yes, but manageable. We've got engineers monitoring the system 24/7. If anything goes wrong, we'll shut it down immediately." "And if you can't shut it down?" Laura shot back. "What then?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to Mia. "Is there any evidence that these disturbances pose a direct threat to the facility or personnel?" Mia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Not yet, but the data suggests the effects are escalating. If we push too far." "We won't," Ethan interrupted. "Trust me, I understand the risks. But backing out now isn't an option. Not when we're this close." With that, he left the room, leaving the others in tense silence. Laura slumped into a chair, covering her face with her hands. "He doesn't get it," she muttered. "None of them do." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe not, but we can't give up either. If we stop now, someone else will pick up where we left off. And they might not be as careful." Mia sighed, staring at the blueprints scattered across the table. "Let's just hope we know what we're doing. Because if we don't," She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing ominously through the mountains. None of them spoke, but the unspoken fear hung thick in the air. Whatever they were creating, it was already changing the world around them, and not for the better. The days turned into weeks as Daniel, Laura, and Mia worked tirelessly in the lab. The atmosphere grew tense, with each new discovery bringing both excitement and dread. The team managed to piece together more of the weapons design, but every step forward seemed to raise more questions than answers. The symbols were complex, layered with meanings that shifted depending on how they were interpreted. It was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept changing shape. One afternoon, Ryan Parker, an engineer assigned to help construct the weapon, joined them in the lab. He was younger than the others, with messy blonde hair and a restless energy. Unlike Ethan, who always seemed calm and calculated, Ryan wore his emotions openly. From the moment he walked in, it was clear he had doubts about the project. "I don't like this," Ryan said bluntly, dropping a stack of blueprints onto the table. "We're building something we don't even understand. What if it's dangerous?" Daniel looked up from the tablet he was studying. "That's why we're being careful. Every decision is double-checked, every calculation reviewed." Ryan shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "Careful isn't enough. This thing, whatever it is, it's not natural. Messing with forces like gravity or time, that's not something humans are supposed to do." Laura nodded slowly, her eyes meeting Ryan's. "I've been saying the same thing, but no one seems to listen." Mia sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not just about listening. The higher-ups have given us orders. They want results, and they want them fast." Ryan crossed his arms, his voice rising. "Orders? Since when did orders justify risking the entire planet? Have you thought about what happens if this thing gets out of control? Or worse, if someone decides to use it as a weapon of war?" Ethan, who had been standing quietly near the door, stepped forward. His tone was firm but measured. "That's exactly why we need to finish it first. If we don't, someone else will. Do you really think other countries will hesitate to use it against us?" Ryan clenched his fists, clearly struggling to keep his temper in check. "And what makes you think we won't use it the same way? Power like this changes people, it corrupts them." Laura glanced at Daniel, silently urging him to say something. But Daniel stayed quiet, torn between Ryan's concerns and the pressure to keep moving forward. He knew Ryan had a point, but the alternative, letting rival nations build the weapon first, felt equally terrifying. "There has to be another way," Ryan insisted, his voice softer now but still filled forwards with determination. "Maybe we can find a way to neutralize it instead of building it. Make sure no one can use it." Ethan's expression hardened. "Neutralizing it isn't an option. Not anymore. Too many resources have been poured into this project. Besides, the fragments themselves seem designed to guide us toward completion. Fighting that would be unwise." Ryan stared at him, disbelief written all over his face. "Unwise? You mean because the prophecy says so?" "Ancient texts aren't exactly reliable sources, Ethan." "It's not just about the prophecy," Mia interjected, attempting to diffuse the tension. "The patterns in the fragments are consistent. They suggest the weapon is inevitable, like it's meant to exist, whether we want it to or not." Ryan threw up his hands in exasperation. "Inevitable? That's your argument? Just because something can happen doesn't mean it should . We're scientists, engineers. We're supposed to think critically, not blindly follow some cosmic script." The room fell silent, the weight of Ryan's words hanging heavy in the air. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I understand your concerns, Ryan, but the decision isn't ours to make. Our job is to ensure the weapon is built safely and responsibly. Beyond that," he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. "Responsibly. Right. Because humanity has such a great track record with power. With that, he turned and stormed out of the lab, leaving the others to sit in uncomfortable silence. Laura watched him go, her heart sinking. She couldn't blame him for feeling the way he did. In fact, she agreed with him. But she also knew there was no easy way out of this situation. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. He's right, about the risks. But stopping now won't fix anything. All we can do is try to stay ahead of the dangers. Laura looked at him, searching his face for reassurance. Instead, she saw only uncertainty. For the first time, she wondered if they were making a terrible mistake, one that might cost far more than any of them realized. The next morning, Daniel and Laura were escorted to a high-security research facility hidden deep within the mountains. The building was unmarked, its existence known only to a select few. As they walked through the sterile hallways, Laura couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Cameras lined the ceilings, their red lights blinking silently. Guards stood at every corner, their faces unreadable. They were led into a large lab filled with advanced equipment. At the center of the room stood a tall woman in a white coat, her dark hair tied back in a neat ponytail. She introduced herself as Mia Rodriguez, a physicist who had been analyzing the artifacts for months. Her handshake was firm, her demeanor confident but approachable. "You're just in time," Maya said, gesturing toward a large table covered in papers, tablets, and digital screens. "We've made some progress, but we still need your expertise." Daniel stepped closer, his eyes scanning the materials. Fragments of stone from different parts of the world had been carefully arranged, their symbols glowing faintly under ultraviolet light. It was eerie how similar they looked despite coming from distant civilizations. "What are these markings?" Laura asked, pointing to one of the screens displaying an enhanced image of the carvings. Mia tapped a few keys, zooming in on the symbols. "Based on our analysis, they're instructions, or at least part of them. Each fragment adds another layer to the blueprint. When combined, they form a complete design for something powerful." "Powerful how?" Daniel pressed, leaning over the table. Mia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Imagine a device that could manipulate the basic forces of nature. Gravity, electromagnetism, even time itself. If built correctly, it could rewrite the rules of reality." Laura's jaw tightened, and if built incorrectly. Mia glanced at Ethan, who stood quietly near the door. He gave a slight nod, signaling her to continue. "Then it could tear reality apart," she admitted, "which is why precision is critical. One wrong move, and we might not survive the consequences." Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just science, it was playing God. And yet, he couldn't deny the allure of uncovering such a monumental discovery. "How close are you to finishing the design?" he asked. "We're about halfway there," Maya replied. "But some sections are still missing. That's where you two come in. Your knowledge of ancient languages and cultures might help us fill in the gaps." Laura picked up a fragment and studied it closely. The symbols seemed familiar, yet alien. "These aren't just instructions," she murmured. "They're warnings. Look here." She pointed to a series of jagged lines surrounding the central pattern. "This symbol appears repeatedly. It's a warning against misuse." Ethan stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Warnings or not, we don't have the luxury of stopping now. Other countries are catching up. If we delay, they'll beat us to it." "But at what cost?" Laura shot back, her voice rising. "You're talking about creating something no one fully understands. What happens when someone decides to use it for their own gain?" "That's why we're doing this under strict oversight," Ethan countered, "to ensure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Daniel listened to their exchange, torn between logic and instinct. On one hand, Ethan's argument made sense. Staying ahead of potential threats was crucial. But Laura's concerns echoed in his mind. Was humanity ready for such power? Mia interrupted his thoughts. "There's more," she said softly. "Some of the fragments suggest the weapon isn't meant to be used directly. Instead, it acts as a catalyst, a trigger for something greater. A trigger for what? Daniel asked, his curiosity piqued. Mia shook her head. That part's unclear. The texts refer to the shaping of eternity, but the exact meaning is lost. It could mean reshaping the future or destroying it. The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over them. Laura set the fragment down gently, her hands trembling slightly. Are we sure we should even be trying to build this? Maybe the ancients hid it for a reason. Ethan's response was firm. Whether we like it or not, the choice has already been made. The question now is whether we guide it, or let someone else do it for us. Daniel exchanged a glance with Laura. Neither spoke, but their shared unease was palpable. Whatever path lay ahead, it was clear they were stepping into uncharted territory, and there would be no turning back. 2 days after the strange encounter in the desert, Daniel Carter found himself sitting in a small, windowless room at a government facility. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Across the table sat Ethan Hayes, a man with sharp features and an even sharper gaze. His suit was immaculate, his posture rigid, but there was something about him that felt off, like he was hiding more than he was saying. So, you're telling me this artifact we found isn't just some old relic? Daniel asked. Leaning back in his chair, he crossed his arms, trying to appear calm despite the unease gnawing at him. Ethan nodded slowly. That's correct. What you uncovered is part of something much larger, a global pattern we've been tracking for years. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs of similar tablets, each bearing markings nearly identical to the ones Daniel and Laura had discovered. Laura, who sat beside Daniel, flipped through the pages silently. Her expression grew darker with every image. These are from all over the world, she said finally, her voice tinged with disbelief. Egypt, China, Peru. How is this possible? That's what we're trying to figure out, Ethan replied. But one thing is clear. These artifacts aren't random. They're pieces of a puzzle. And if we put them together, they point to something extraordinary. Daniel frowned. You mean the weapon, the one carved into the tablet? Ethan hesitated before answering. Yes, but it's not just any weapon. According to our analysis, it's capable of altering fundamental forces. Gravity, time, energy. All of it could be manipulated by whoever controls it. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Daniel glanced at Laura, who looked pale. She closed the folder and pushed it away. And you want us to help build it? She asked, her tone skeptical. Not exactly, Ethan said. We already have teams working on reconstructing the design based on the fragments. Your role would be advisory, to ensure we interpret the symbols correctly and avoid mistakes. Mistakes, Daniel echoed. What kind of mistakes? Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. Let's just say this isn't the first time humanity has tried to recreate ancient technology. Past attempts haven't ended well. Laura's eyes narrowed. Why now? Why push so hard to build something like this? Ethan sighed, glancing down at the table. For the first time, his polished demeanor cracked, revealing a flicker of doubt. Because we don't have a choice. Other nations know about these artifacts too. If we don't act quickly, someone else will get there first. And trust me, you don't want to see what happens then. Daniel rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache. This wasn't what he'd signed up for when he became an archaeologist. Uncovering history was one thing. Playing a role in a potential arms race was another entirely. What makes you think we can even trust you? Laura asked bluntly. For all we know, this could be some kind of power grab. Ethan met her gaze steadily. You're right to be cautious. But consider this. If we don't work together, the consequences could be catastrophic. This isn't just about politics or greed. It's about survival. Daniel mulled over his words. As much as he wanted to walk away, curiosity tugged at him. What if the tablet held answers to questions humanity had been asking for centuries? Could they really turn their backs on that? Finally, he spoke. If we agree to help, what's the catch? Ethan smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. The catch is, once you're in, there's no going back. You'll have access to resources most scientists can only dream of, but you'll also be under constant surveillance. No leaks. No second-guessing. Do we have a deal? Laura shot Daniel a worried look, but he ignored it. Deep down, he knew they were stepping into dangerous territory. Yet something about the mystery called to him. Maybe it was arrogance, maybe it was hope, but he couldn't let it go. Fine, Daniel said at last. We're in. As Ethan stood to shake their hands, Laura muttered under her breath, I hope we don't regret this. Daniel didn't respond. He wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dry, cracked earth of New Mexico. Daniel Carter knelt on the ground, brushing away layers of dirt with careful hands. His fingers traced the edge of something smooth and cold beneath the surface. It was stone, ancient, and weathered by time. Beside him, Laura Bennett adjusted her wide-brimmed hat to shield her face from the harsh glare of the sun. She leaned closer, her sharp eyes scanning the markings etched into the tablet. This is different, Laura said softly, almost to herself. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and unease. These symbols, they don't match anything I've seen before. Daniel nodded, his brow furrowed as he studied the strange carvings. The lines were intricate, forming patterns that seemed both deliberate and chaotic. Some looked like stars, others like swirling storms or twisting rivers. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another artifact for a museum display. There was something deeper here, something important. Do you think it's a map? Daniel asked, glancing at Laura. He had spent years digging up relics from forgotten civilizations, but this felt different. This felt urgent. Laura shook her head. Not a map. Look at these shades. They're more symbolic. Like a story, or maybe instructions. She paused, pointing to one section of the tablet. See this? It looks like a weapon, a blade, or some kind of tool. A weapon. Daniel raised an eyebrow. From who? And why bury it out here? Laura didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and began sketching the symbols. Her hand moved quickly, capturing every detail. After a few minutes, she flipped back through earlier pages filled with similar drawings from other sites they'd explored recently. A pattern started to emerge. I've been seeing fragments of this same design at all the dig sites, she explained. Each piece tells part of a bigger picture. If we put them together. Her voice trailed off, but her expression said enough. They were onto something big. Just then, a gust of wind kicked up dust around them, making both archaeologists squint. When the air cleared, Daniel noticed movement near their truck parked a short distance away. Two men in dark suits stood watching them. One held a clipboard while the other spoke quietly into a phone. Neither looked friendly. Who are those guys? Daniel muttered under his breath. Laura followed his gaze and frowned. I don't know, but I don't like it. Let's pack up and get out of here. They worked quickly, wrapping the tablet in protective cloth and placing it carefully into a padded crate. But as they loaded everything into the truck, the men approached. The taller of the two flashed a badge too quickly for either of them to read. Dr. Carter. Dr. Bennett. He said in a clipped tone. We need to talk about what you found. Daniel exchanged a glance with Laura. Something about the man's demeanor set off alarm bells. Still, there was no point in refusing. Not out here, miles from anywhere. What do you know about this? The man continued, gesturing toward the crate. Not much yet, Daniel replied cautiously. It's old, possibly significant. We'll need time to study it properly. The man's lips pressed into a thin line. Time isn't something we have. People higher up are very interested in your discovery. You'll be hearing from us soon. With that, the two men turned and walked back toward their own vehicle. Daniel watched them go, his mind racing. What had they stumbled upon? And why did it feel like the world was about to change? As they drove away from the site, Laura broke the silence. Do you think they know what it really is? Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just history anymore. It's something far bigger than we imagined.